Good morning, third and fourth graders. Today we are going to read Chapter 8, An Island of the Blue Dolphins. But let's review a little bit about what happened yesterday. Yesterday, Ramono did not make it onto the boat because he went back for his fishing spear. And once Karina realized that her little brother had not made it on the boat and she saw him back on the island, she jumped off the ship to swim back to be with Ramono. Now, she was very, very upset at him while she was swimming back to the island, but once she got back to him, she was not mad at him anymore once she saw how disappointed he didn't get on the ship. So she comforted him, and she was only disappointed that her skirt of yucca fibers that she had taken so long to make was ruined. Chapter 8. The wind blew strong as we climbed the trail, covering the mesa with sand that sifted around our legs and shut out the sky. Since it was not possible to find our way back, we took shelter among some rocks. We stayed there until night fell. Then the winds lessened and the moon came out, and by its light we could reach our village. The huts looked like ghosts in the cold light. As we neared them, I heard a strange sound like that of running feet. I thought that it was a sound made by the wind, but when we came closer, I saw dozens of wild dogs scurrying around through the huts. They ran from us, snarling as they went. The pack must have slunk into the village soon after we left, for it had gorged itself upon the abalone we had not taken. It had gone everywhere searching out food, and Ramono and I had to look hard to find enough for our supper. While we ate beside a small fire, I could hear the dogs on the hill not far away, and through the night their howls came to me on the wind. But when the sun rose and I went out of the hut, the pack trotted off towards its lair, which was at the north side of the island in the large cave. That day we spent gathering food. The wind blew and the waves crashed against the shore so that we could not go out on the rocks. I gathered gull eggs on the cliff, and Ramo speared a string of small fish in one of the tide pools. He brought them home, walking proudly with the string over his back. He felt that in this way he had made up for the trouble he had caused. With the seeds I had gathered in a ravine, we had a plentiful meal, although I had to cook it on a flat rock. My bowls were at the bottom of the sea. The wild dogs came again that night, drawn by the scent of fish. They had sat on the hill, barking and growling at each other. I could see the light from the fire shining in their eyes. At dawn, they left. The ocean was calm this day, and we were able to hunt abalone among the rocks. From seaweed, we wove a rough basket, which we filled before the sun was overhead. On the way home, carrying the abalone between us, Ramo and I stopped on the cliff. The air was clear, and we could look far out to the sea in the direction the ship had gone. "Will it come back today?" Ramo asked. "It may," I answered, though I did not think so. "More likely it will come after many suns, for the country where it had gone is far off." Ramo looked up at me. His black eyes shone. "I do not care if the ship never comes," he said. "Why do you say this?" I asked him. Ramo thought, making a hole in the earth with the point of his spear. "Why?" I asked again. "Because I like it here with you," he said. "It is more fun than with the others. Tomorrow I am going to where the canoes are hidden and bring one back to Coral Cove. We will use it to fish in and to go looking around the island." "They are too heavy for you to put into the water." "You will see." Ramo threw out his chest. Around his neck was a string of sea elephant teeth, which someone had left behind. It was much too large for him, and the teeth were broken, but they rattled as he thrust the spear down between us. "You forget," "That I am the son of ch.8," he said. "I do not forget," I answered. "But you are a small son. Some day you will be tall and strong, and then you will be able to handle a big canoe." "I am the son of ch.8," he said again, as he spoke. His eyes suddenly grew large. "I am his son, and since he is dead, I have taken his place. I am now chief of Galahast. All my wishes must be obeyed. But first you must become a man. As in the customs before, I will have to whip you with a switch of nettles and then tie you to a red anthill." Ramo grew pale. He had seen the rights of manhood given in our tribe and remembered them. Quickly I said, "Since there are no men to give the rights, perhaps you will not have to undergo the nettles and the ants, Chief Ramo." "I do not know if this name suits me," he said, smiling. He tossed his spear at a passing gull. "I will think of something better." I watched him stride off to get the spear, a little boy with thin arms and thin legs like sticks, wearing a big string of sea elephant teeth. Now that he had become chief of Galahast, I would have even more trouble with him. But I wanted to run after him and take him in my arms. "I have thought of a name," he said when he came back. "What is it?" I asked solemnly. "I am Chief Tanyo Sit Lapea." "That is a very long name and hard to say." "You will soon learn," Chief Tanya Sit Lapea said. I had no thoughts of letting Chief Tanya Sit Lapea go alone to the place where the canoes were hidden. But the next morning when I awoke, I found that Ramo was not in the hut. He was not outside either, and I knew then that he had gotten up in the dark and left by himself. I was frightened, and I thought of all that might happen to befall him. He had climbed down the kelp rope once before, but he would have trouble pushing even the smallest of the canoes off the rocks. And if he did get one afloat without hurting himself, would he be able to paddle around the sand pit where the tides ran fast? Thinking of the dangers, I started off to overtake him. I had not gone far along the trail before I began to wonder if I should not let him go to the cliff by himself. There was no way of telling when the ship would come back for us. Until it did, we were alone up on the island. Ramo, therefore, would have to become a man sooner than if we were not alone, since I would need his help in many ways. Suddenly I turned around and caught the trail towards Coral Cove. If Ramo could put the canoe in the water and get through the tides that raced around the sand pit, he would reach the harbor when the sun was tall in the sky. I would be waiting on the beach for what was the fun of a voyage if no one were there to greet him. I put Ramo out of my mind as I reached and searched the rocks for mussel. I thought of the food we would need to gather and how best to protect it from the wild dogs when we were not in the village. I thought of the ship. I tried to remember what Metesep had said to me. For the first time, I began to wonder if the ship would ever return. I wondered about this as I pried the shell off the rocks, and I stopped and looked fearful at the empty sea that stretched away further than my eyes could reach. The sun moved higher. There was no sign of Ramo. I began to feel uneasy. The basket was filled, and I carried it up to the mesa. From there, I looked down on the harbor and further on along the coast to the spit that thrust out like fish hook onto the ocean. I could see the small waves sliding up the sand, and beyond them a carving line of foam where the currents raced. I waited on the mesa until the sun was overhead. Then I hurried back to the village, hoping that Ramo might have come back while I was gone. The hut was empty. Quickly I dug a hole for the shellfish, rolled a heavy stone over it, an opening to protect them from the wild dogs, and started off towards the south part of the island. 2 trails led there, one on each side of a long sand dune. Ramo was not on the trail I was traveling, and thinking that he might be coming back out of sight along the other one, I called to him as I ran. I heard no answer, but I did hear far off the barking of dogs. The barking grew louder as I came closer to the cliff. I would die away, and after a short silence, start up again. The sound came from the opposite side of the dunes, and leaving the trail, I climbed upward through the sand to its top. A short distance beyond the dune cliff, near the cliff, I saw a pack of wild dogs. There were many of them, and they were moving around in a circle. In the middle of the circle was Ramo. He was lying on his back and had a deep wound in his throat. He lay very still. When I picked him up, I knew that he was dead. There were other wounds on his body from the teeth of the wild dogs. He had been dead a long time, and from his footsteps on the earth I could see that he had never reached the cliff. 2 dogs lay on the ground not far from him, and in the side of one of them was a broken spear. I carried Ramo back to the village, reaching it when the sun was far down. The dogs followed me all the way, but when I laid him down in the hut and came out with a club in my hand, they trotted off to the low hill. A big gray dog with long, curling hair and yellow eyes was their leader, and he went last. It was growing dark, but I followed them up the hill. Slowly they retreated in front of me, not making a sound. I followed them across the hills and a small valley to the 3rd hill, whose face was a ledge of rock. At one end of the ledge was a cave. One by one the dogs went into it. The mouth of the cave was too wide and high to fill with rocks. I gathered brush and made a fire, thinking that I would push it back into the cave. Through the night, I would feed it and push it further and further back. But there was not enough brush for this. When the moon rose, I left the cave and went off through the valley and over the 3 hills to my home. All night I sat there with the body of my brother and did not sleep. I vowed that someday I would go back and kill the wild dogs in the cave. I would kill all of them. I thought of how I would do it, but mostly I thought of Ramo, my brother.